Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Gospel According to John, an encounter with grace and truth. Today we'll be talking about lesson 25 of our study, which covers the Gospel according to John, chapter 20, verse 19, through chapter 21, verse 25. As we left off, Jesus has appeared now to Mary Magdalene in what was the morning time of Sunday, the first day of the week, Resurrection Day. Now we fast forward to and left it with he was going to ascend. Now we fast forward to evening of that day. Mary, as well at this point as Peter and John, have all gone back and talked to people about what's going on. So the people who didn't go to the tomb are up to speed, and Peter and John will have also been up to speed with the fact that Mary saw the risen Lord. And so everybody is presumably very much talking about the fact that, is Jesus raised from the dead? That's amazing, great. But let's lock the doors, because that's not the only thing to worry about. The Jews just murdered Jesus. They might be coming for his followers. That's a lot easier to pull off because we're way less popular. So not that locking the door is actually going to help if the Jewish leaders decide to come and get you. But it just shows their mental state, right? Everyone has to make this transition from pre-resurrection to post-resurrection Jesus, and what that means. And what we see in this lesson is how that transition works. And we follow along with Jesus' followers as they transition. Even Peter and John, who trust that what's happening is good, and who have gotten literally over the threshold of the tomb, still haven't fully gotten up to speed with next steps. And so that's largely where we're going now. So to kick it off, Jesus appears in a locked room. Text is not entirely clear as to how that works. Does he just come out of the kitchen when nobody's been in there? Does he just show up? Does he walk through the wall? Again, logistics apparently don't matter. It's just they're locked in a room and then Jesus is there. What is his message? First thing he says to them, peace be with you, which is an extremely important message. It is going to be, in many ways, the primary message of the risen Lord, and the critical thing for them to get to themselves is they're not at peace at this point, as evidenced by their fear. Fear and peace don't really go very well together. But what do they have to be afraid of, right? Their buddy is now invincible. He was before, but he's now demonstrably and obviously invincible, and he's inviting them to the same. Hard thing to wrap your head around. Even if you told them it was coming, they likely do need a little bit of time to adjust to that idea. And we see from what the apostles end up doing following the resurrection, that they ultimately very much get on board with the idea that even if they die in this life, they are ultimately invincible. But that's the thing in the spiritual sense. But that's the thing that takes, again, some getting used to. So Jesus' point, peace be with you, is one of, you should not, conflict is not a thing that should be a relevant consideration for you. Because what would take from you your peace, the idea that you can be harmed, or that things can go badly for you. And that's not true anymore for anyone who follows Jesus. Yes, your body can be harmed. Yes, you can run out of money and other worldly bad things can happen. But in the ultimate sense of who you are and where we're going, the only way you can be harmed is if you make choices that allow harm to come to you. External things cannot now adversely affect your eternal salvation, insofar as you stay with Jesus. And so peace be with you, because you have nothing to fear. And from there he gives them physical evidence that they have nothing to fear, right? Like, look, see, doesn't matter. It's all fine, in case you were missing it. And then they're glad. First shock, then, oh no, this is Jesus. Yay. They're having an interesting day for sure. Here we see John's version of the foundation of the church, post-resurrection, which again is happening not 50 days following, but same day. So Jesus again reiterates, peace be with you. There's nothing at all for you to be afraid of. And then says, also, I've got a job for you guys. Remember what I was doing for the last 3 years where you were following me around? Now you go do that. God sent me to do it. I did it for a while. Now I'm going up to where God is, and I'm sending you out to do it. So I'm like God in this, and you're like me previously. I understand that you guys haven't been enough like me to do that on your own. So, here. This is very much a sacramental exchange, right? That we see in Acts of the Apostles as Pentecost. It is the breath, the Spirit of God coming upon these guys. So, yeah, I'm going to give you a job, but I'm not going to send you out there without equipping you to go. And this is, for these guys, the first interaction of what Jesus has achieved with his death and resurrection. Now, his Spirit is in them. It is not done with water, but it's very much the sense of them entering into the life of Christ, as we do now with baptism and complete with confirmation. He's kind of doing it, he's Jesus, he's kind of doing it all at once. And holy orders to boot, right? Who sends you forgive or forgiven, right? He's like, we now have specific sacramental contexts by which certain graces and marks and seals of the Holy Spirit are given to people. If you're Jesus, you can just show up. You don't need to follow the forms. This water, this oil, these places, these words. Jesus is not bound by those things, right? He can just, you're baptized, you're confirmed, your holy orders, go do all of those things. Go be basically priests. The forgiveness of sins part, that's not an all Christians thing, right? That's a priesthood thing. And they're doing it in the name of Jesus. He's sending them out to do that. So he's built his church on these few guys. And the most important thing that they're doing is about sin. Why is that? It's because that's what's different here. Before what Jesus did, everyone is dead in their sin. Now, they don't have to be. But Jesus is not the one carrying out, spreading the fruit of what he did. He did it. It's possible now for people to live instead of die. And Jesus is just going to take off and leave it to these guys to spread that fruit of what he did. Okay, guys, everyone on earth now doesn't have to be dead in sin. You should go tell them that. I did my part. I'm going to just go chill now. And it's on you to make what I did effective for humanity. And that's the church. That's taking the gift of Christ and making it available to humanity. As for why Jesus chose to do it that way, your guess is as good as mine, right? There's a sense he's talked about where it's necessary that his human body be up with God, so our spirits can. It's an exchange program, right? You need a physical body up in heaven for a Holy Spirit to come down to earth. In some sense, he's alluded to when he was building up to his ascension. So there's a sense where without him being up there, the things that are happening down here can't. But of course, he could physically be in more than one place at once, right? Jesus could keep doing this down here if he wanted to. He doesn't. He did his part, and he wants us to do a part also. He's not saving us all by himself. I mean, God could have from the beginning just made us not sin by the same logic. And he chose instead to have us be participants in the world around us and even who we are. What he did is he made it possible for us to be more than we had been able to be before that, for our world to be more than we were making it on our own. He gave us the tools we needed in the form of sacramental grace, and then said, great, build something with this. And that's what he's saying here to these guys. And the primary way that works is through sin and how they handle sin. Because that's the thing that's been holding the world back, is there's been this covenant that's been in place, this rule, this unbreakable rule, as sure as gravity, that if you sin, you die. Period. Once. One sin. Death. So sin is the thing that causally leads to death. Now there are 10 guys, about to be 11, but 10, we'll see, who have the ability to say, not dead, not sin, who have the ability to change the consequence of sin. The covenant has changed. The law has changed. You can now have sinned and not be dead. Because these guys can say, I'm going to just take that away. And now you're not dead. The single one rule has changed. And people have the ability to interact with that. Sin still, where sin is, there is still death. But sin doesn't have to linger. It can be gotten rid of. It can be absolved through human means. Before, right? In the Synoptic Gospels, there's the account where Jesus says to the guy, "Your sins are forgiven," and everybody complains and says, "Only God can forgive sins," which is accurate, right? Before, right? Like that was the territory of God and God alone. They were correct in that. That's not true anymore. These guys also can't. And that's the greatest grace in the world from the church, is Jesus has built divinely a human thing that is still in possession of the Spirit of God, that has from him the authority to adequately address the problem of sin, which killing animals certainly couldn't. So you have a new priesthood rooted in Jesus Christ. We know the commandment of the new covenant. He gave it to them before he died. Love one another as I have loved you. It's very much a priesthood of service. And he reiterates it here, as the Father sent me, so I'm sending you. Well, how did the Father send him? For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son. We see in John 3, and we see pretty quickly that involved sacrifice and death on Jesus' part. He's not telling these guys, he's saying, peace, go out, this is going to be rough, but it's great, peace. You are spiritually indestructible. Now go out and get physically destructed, right? But to bring to the world this greater thing than it has known previously. And this is John's account of the creation and commissioning of the church. When Jesus appeared, created his church, commissioned his followers, let all of his close inner circle see him after he rose from the dead, Thomas was maybe out getting dinner, or he was just not there for whatever reason, and he missed it. Which, Jesus doesn't make mistakes, right? Was on purpose. Why? Here we get to see Thomas serving as the representative, as the stand-in for all of us followers of Jesus who weren't there, right? We've got 10 guys who represent 10 guys, and Thomas who represents literally everyone who's ever come after. And the concern he voices is a legitimate and an important one for all of us who weren't there to see Jesus raised from the dead. He gets a little bit of flack for this sometimes, right? Doubting Thomas, how could he possibly not believe without seeing that his friend who was dead isn't dead anymore, and is God, and can teleport through walls apparently. What a faithless loser this Thomas guy is, right? There are kind of shades or hints of that sometimes when people talk about him. He is all of us. He is, how can I possibly accept this? It is a hard thing to believe. And that's what he says. I won't believe it unless not only I see it, but I touch it, right? I have to be hands-on with this reality, or there's no way. Sorry guys, but I don't believe you. It's a step too far. You all seem very convinced that you saw this. I don't doubt that you think that you saw it, but I still don't think it's real. There's no way. And that's a thing some people who want to doubt the Christian message still do is, I believe that you think you saw something. They don't dismiss the whole thing. I think that you think this, but that's not the same as me accepting it as well. I'm not going to say nothing happened, but I'm going to say, without firsthand experience of it, I don't think it's the thing that you think happened. In daily life, this is not an uncommon thing, right? Somebody comes and tells you something they saw, and you think, that doesn't sound quite right to me, and then you go try to check it out for yourself as well, right? With way less significant things that it's snowing outside versus the guy who is dead isn't dead anymore, and that wasn't forecast. I'm not sure. Let me see, right? I don't think it's actually snowing outside. Oh, sure enough, it is. Now I believe that. It's not at all an uncommon thing. It's a human thing to want to verify, right? At best, we have the phrase trust but verify. Sure, I accept that this is likely true, but still got to be sure. Just got to prove it. So Thomas gets a little too much, maybe, flack when he's representing or standing in for all of us who don't have the ability to see and physically interact with Jesus. Also, look at what he does. He's said he needs to physically get his hands on Jesus to recognize. When he sees Jesus, he doesn't seem to continue to think that, right? Just seeing is enough. Jesus shows up, says, Thomas, you thought you needed to touch me? Go for it. Thomas, instead of says, my Lord and my God, right? That's not what the other guys have said. We don't have an account of any of them acknowledging yet the divinity of Jesus Christ. Thomas is the first one to do that. He is the 12th one to encounter the risen Christ, they were told, right? 10 disciples, obviously not Judas, and Mary Magdalene. And now Thomas makes 12. And he's the first one in the text that acknowledges the divinity of Jesus Christ, my Lord and my God. So he starts out behind, but he does a very important thing. When he does get it, he gets it. And he's on board. And then Jesus makes the point, okay, Thomas, here's our problem, is you guys see me. You now see how hard the core premise of this thing is, but it's critical that everybody be able to buy into this. Blessed are those who have not seen and believed. You all need to go and convince people of this who aren't going to see it for themselves. So, Thomas, you see how rough that was to buy into? Figure out how to get other people to do that now. That's your job from now on, is to get everybody who hasn't had this encounter of me to also accept that that's what's going on. And not just yours, Thomas, but all of you guys as well. You couldn't get Thomas to accept this, and he's a pretty good candidate for accepting it. You need to figure out how to get everyone else you talk to, or as many as possible. Again, that's your job now, and that's what the church is doing, and what it's meant to do. And then the gospel ends, and doesn't end. We've still got a chapter left. But there is a little bit of a conclusion here. So we're going to talk, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, a little bit about the structure here. In general, scholarly consensus is typically, and almost universally, but not quite, but almost, that the same author wrote the last chapter as wrote the rest of this. So what I think is useful for thinking about this is, you ever written a draft, gotten something pretty much all the way done, and then thought, oh, there's a point I really needed to make, and then added it back in? With word processors, it's easy to add it back in wherever. With paper and pens being not super cheap and common, maybe you just add it on at the end, right? There's a thing that it ended up being important, a thread that John didn't get in this first wrap-up. What has he gotten to? He's gotten to creation of the church, mission of the church, key task of the church. And he's illustrated and demonstrated all of that very well. And then he said, and Jesus did way more than that as well. And, I wrote this down as a part of myself trying to help you, not me, John, just me, author. This is here to try to do what I was talking about, to try to get you to believe. I wrote it down to try to do what Jesus did for Thomas by appearing to him. This book is a version of trying to do that. Here you go. I hope you're on board. And I tied up a whole lot of the loose ends, right? We've seen so many of the threads and themes of the gospel come full circle, get tied up, been brought to fruition in Jesus Christ. But again, general wisdom is this was written quite a while after the death of Jesus, and is one of the resurrection of Jesus, and is one of the later books in the New Testament. And some other things have happened, and there's just a little bit more that is important to set up and to just make super clear. Specifically, the fulfillment of this idea of the positions of John and Peter, and especially Peter. It was there at the tomb, right? He laid the foundation and the framework. It's there. To my mind, what I think happened is he realized, maybe I was a little too subtle on that Peter getting there first thing, and exactly what that means. And I think people are, the people who read the draft didn't get what I meant about Peter by that. John is in this, and even more in Revelation, is very prone to some abstract imagery. And maybe he out-subtled himself a little bit on what he was going for with Peter and John in the foot race and at the tomb. You're distributing your draft, you're asking people for notes and comments, and it just went over everybody's head. And he thought, I need to clarify that. People aren't quite getting what I'm really trying to say there. Let me add another. Let me, tell this other story that happened as well to make sure people catch the full meaning of this. Because as he's pointed out, there are tons and tons of things that happened that I didn't write down because I was trying to distill to this key point. But you're missing this one key part that's important for you to get. So I'm going to write down one more thing that happened and tag it on here at the end just to make sure that we haven't missed anything. But I think in initial draft form, this was meant to be the end. And then on further reflection, more was needed. So it'll be interesting to see what additional point John thought he needed to make. Because this chapter is, let's say, an afterthought added on, it doesn't immediately follow time-wise continuity from the previous section, where we knew everything happened within this octave of Easter, right? You had the day Jesus rose from the dead through 8 days later, marking a new octave feast celebration and neatly tying a bow on the whole thing. We've got our 8-day resurrection feast of Jesus now. Great, that's over. Now when is it? We don't know. We know it's far enough after that people have had time to go home, or at least to Peter's home region, where initially Jesus called the disciples. And that's going to be important because this is a new calling to a new kind of disciples. So we're going back to how things were before to re-emphasize this is a second pass at John chapter 1 when Jesus called his initial disciples. Because it means a very different thing to be a disciple now. Back then, being a disciple of Jesus meant just following him around as he engaged in his public ministry. Now it means doing what he did, not being a guy following him around. We'll see more. It means a very different thing. So to set the scene, everybody's back. At least most of them seem to be back there. And even though the mission has been given and there's a sense of go make everybody aware of Christianity and of what I've done for them, that's still a pretty vague and not very actionable mission, or can be. Jesus, that's great. How are we going to pay for that? Jesus, that's great, but where specifically am I supposed to go, right? Or what does that look like? You kind of left it pretty vague, Jesus. And maybe some more instruction would be helpful. And in the absence of a clear sense of what next, they kind of did what you do if it was over. They went home. And Peter is even, I don't know, you want to go fishing? Which there are a few things that could be. It could just be, I don't know what else to do and it's a good way to clear my mind. It could be, we need to keep eating, let's make some money. It could be, what do our lives look like now? Maybe we dip our toes in going back to what we were doing before. Maybe not knowing exactly why they're doing it. Or for a combination of different reasons, not only Peter, but a number of other disciples of Jesus find themselves out at night fishing. And not having very much luck with it, as we'll see. But significantly now, they're fishing. We also see Peter in a leadership role. Everybody else is kind of following along with whatever Peter feels like doing. Which happens to be sitting on a boat in the middle of the night not catching any fish. And so that's our scene. And from there, we will see what happens. In many ways, this section is a reiteration of the same theme we saw in the race to the tomb. They see a guy on the shore after being out all night fishing, not catching any fish, who says, "Hey, have you caught anything? No? Why don't you try just cast your net over to the right side of the boat?" Like they hadn't done, right? They've definitely cast the net off the right side of the boat before. It's not like there's a magical thing about the right side of the boat. And there's probably some skepticism, but we don't see that. We see, sure, why not? And not all of these guys are professional fishermen, after all. So there might not be the same attitude. In the synoptic version of this, there's the sense of, that can't possibly work, what do you know, but begrudgingly doing it anyway. Here it's just, it kind of reads more like, yeah, sure, why not? What do we have to lose? And they catch a whole lot of fish. And it's at that point, not at initial sight, not at an initial sound. Again, maybe they're too far away, or we've seen raised Jesus just doesn't look the same as Jesus before the resurrection. And we don't know if he always looks the same as he does every other time either. It's not necessarily true that he always looks the same as every other time you see him either. But for whatever reason, they don't initially know that it's Jesus. And then as soon as all the fish come in, John gets it first, right? Oh, guys, that's Jesus. He doesn't just keep it to himself either. He says, oh, that's Jesus. So he gets there first. But then what happens? Peter gets dressed and dives into the water. Yep, I agree, John, now that you mention it. Totally, that's Jesus. So you guys have fun with these fish. I'm more concerned about Jesus. I'm out. And he swims to the shore. Same general sense of what we saw at the tomb. John got there, noticed something was new and unique about what was going on, and stopped short. But got there first. Peter, getting there second, takes that next step. Peter, recognizing once John mentions it, oh yes, you're right, that's Jesus. Why am I out in this boat again? Why am I fishing again? I don't care about fishing. I care about Jesus. What have I been doing? I don't care about any of this. Let me go talk to Jesus. Like immediately, who cares that we caught a bunch of fish now? I'm not really interested in fishing. I just didn't know what I was doing. Or whatever reason he was out there suddenly doesn't matter, right? The only thing that matters to him is Jesus. And everybody else still thinking the fish are in some way, shape, or form important. Priorities, right? And how often do we do that? Yeah, Jesus, you're important, but this net full of things weighing me down that I have to bring with me to follow you. I can't just rid myself of concern or care for the things in my daily life and rapidly follow you where you're going. I've got to drag all this stuff behind me with me, and it slows me down. That's not Peter, but it seems to kind of be everybody else. Now that everybody has arrived on shore, we see a few interesting things happening. One, Jesus has been cooking breakfast, which is really maybe not what you expect your resurrected, all-powerful God to be doing, but it is what he's doing. He also had fish already. Doesn't say where, and bread. We'll come back to that. Doesn't say where he got them, but he has already had some food. He doesn't really have any need of what's in the boat for himself. But he nonetheless also says, why don't you bring me some of those fish that you all caught? And now all of a sudden, Peter, who didn't care at all about the fish that they caught and was more than happy to leave them behind, suddenly thinks, oh, Jesus wants some of the fish, and goes and helps people drag them in and bring some of the fish to Jesus. He doesn't care at all about the fish for their own sake, but he cares very much about what it is that Jesus wants him to do, and is again very enthusiastic about whatever that is. Which, if you're one of the other guys and you're not charitably disposed, you're thinking, oh, now he cares about helping us, right? But they're probably much more charitable than that. But I can see how that could rub somebody the wrong way if they were having a bad night. This is another repeat of a previous scene in the gospel. At the beginning of John chapter 6, Jesus multiplies the loaves and fish. Human effort is involved in that people provide some of the food, and then Jesus makes it enough. Jesus' followers here have been providing effort in the boat, and he multiplies that, and then they continue to do work and provide through their work some of the food for the meal, even though Jesus provided some and could have provided all, right? If Jesus can have some fish and bread, he can have enough for everybody. He chose not to have enough for everybody. The idea still being like it was in the previous version of this, that scarcity and abundance are not meaningful concepts to Jesus. There is. When you need, there is. Which I think is brought up here as an important reminder for these guys in the new state of the resurrection. I think it suggests that the reason they're fishing is to provide. Jesus was probably a much better fundraiser than these guys initially were. He had benefactors, right? They weren't worried about paying the bills while they were wandering around for 3 years and where food was going to come from. Jesus took care of all of that. But if you lose Jesus, you're probably going to lose a lot of the financial support that you had along the way as well. So I see it as the return to fishing is a sense of we've got to take care of ourselves somehow. How are we going to provide? How are we going to live? And so this whole thing ends up as a repeat of the previous, as an important reminder. I don't want you guys focusing on this. I will still take care of that. And your efforts are better directed. There's another interesting theme here. The exact number of fish, there are some ideas floating around about what it can mean. By far the most persuasive, going back a long time, is that it's representative of all of the peoples of the earth. And in that sense, you also have this fascinating metaphor of the net as church. This net is a thing that can tie together all the different people of the world, which is still just an extraordinary idea today. We've seen, in theory, technology able to unite and to bring us all together. It at least allows us to communicate all with one another, but it hasn't actually weaved us together and unified us at all. We have not grown, as we've grown more connected, we have not grown unified in a way that the church does. The church, under one umbrella, correctly operating, does knit different peoples from vastly different backgrounds, cultures, together into one in a way that nothing else that I'm really aware of does. And so we also see an image of that, of Jesus tells us where to cast. We cast our net, and then that's what they're needing to do, right? The Synoptic Gospels put a story like this one much earlier, with the first call of these guys, and come with me and I'll make you fishers of men, right? John has it here where it's the second calling, the one where Jesus really is calling them now to go out and catch people in the net of the church and reel them in and bring them together. And don't worry about how you're going to survive or pay for anything. Reminder, guys, I turned 7 loaves and fish into enough to feed 5,000 people. Like, don't worry about the financial aspect of this. It'll be okay. And why don't you focus on not catching fish, but on catching people and doing that thing I was talking to you about before, needing to do. So, new chapter, second ending to the gospel. What we're about to get into is probably the most significant reason for the add-on, but there is this reminder here also to the early church of what is your job and what is your focus. If Christianity is brand new, it's easy to get very excited about it and to think that's all I need to do, right? But turns out you still have to go to work and you still have to do some other things. Like, life keeps going. It's pretty common with a conversion experience to get super excited and enthusiastic and all in, and that's great. But then at some point it kicks in and you realize life is still going on as well, and then it can become a tremendous challenge to balance. What does that mean? And how does that work long term versus immediately? So you can say immediately, this is great, I want to do nothing other than pray and serve God and find out His place for my life. I'm going to quit my job and dedicate myself to doing that. And while God can provide for that, maybe He doesn't either. As things go, you start having to balance, what does God actually want versus what do I actually want? And how do I do that? And how do I focus my effort on serving God instead of providing for myself? Because the pendulum can swing back to normalizing, okay, I'm a Christian, but now I'm doing all the things I did before because I've had to pay the bills, so I'm back to my normal life. And now swing hard toward all in, reality kicks in, swing back toward mostly how I was before. Here's a reminder, you don't get to go that far back. That's not where the pendulum ends. You were more right the first time than you are now, but potentially your faith wavered a little bit and caused you to take a step back. And I could easily imagine the early church going through the cycle like that, where initially tremendous amount of zeal, everybody's all in, giving their lives to and for the church above all else. And we see a lot of that in Acts. But again, John was writing a little bit later. And maybe he's starting to see in some pockets of the church people tending back toward focusing more on worldly things and forgetting or losing some of that initial zeal. And he's using this story as a chance to remind people, hey, no, this is what the church is. Remember? And here are things not to worry about, and here are things to worry about. So in framing this next thing that's about to happen, he's also throwing in this reminder for the early church. After breakfast, here we see what I think is the critical point of this last chapter, the primary reason it was likely added after the original conclusion, and just an amazing conclusion in general to this gospel, which is this exchange between Jesus and Peter. There is a lot of stuff out there about this. Some of it, I think, kind of corny. Especially things, as it turns out, that get into some of the underlying meanings of some of these words, I think can get pretty far off track. Maybe you'll agree with me, maybe not. This is what I think this means, and I think it makes sense in the context of what we've been talking about and what the gospel means and where it's going. You can take it or leave it, but I'm going to tell you how I see it. And to do that, first we're going to start with, in case you don't already know, if you haven't done a decent amount of Bible study on John before already, you might not know going into this, there are two different words for love used in this exchange. The word agape and the word philia, which we've talked about already as we've been going through this gospel, because they've come up a decent amount before. Reminder about definitions. And here again, we're going to use some cat theology. Because I think it's better to illustrate this, I think, with an image than it is with just straight definitions. Just because I don't think the definitions are that helpful or accessible. Although we'll do some of that too. So the word philia is, and I'll make it clear which ones are which when we actually get to unwrapping the text, is friend, right? I regard you as my friend. Critical, important thing about friendship. We're not friends with people who aren't in some way, shape, or form like us, right? And I'm more likely to be a friend with somebody the more, in general, they have in common with me. And the farther away from me and unlike me someone is, the less close we can generally tend to be, unless we're really going to likely be friends. So philia is one of those words. For the sake of this conversation, we're going to treat that as friendship. And we'll explain in image what that means in a bit. The other word is agape. Again, much has been made of it. In the Gospel according to John, the best example of it is the washing of the feet by Jesus, which he does to demonstrate right before he describes to his disciples the new commandment. Agape one another as I have agape you. Love one another as I have loved you. What does that look like? When you look at it as demonstrated, it looks like I, all-powerful, all-knowing God, am going to lower myself to disregard the difference in our status to serve your need. I'm going to put myself in your shoes, almost literally, to serve and care for you. More broadly speaking, it can mean service and love. The word is broader than that. There's in the 3rd chapter of John, there's toward the end, there's the passage about the people preferred the darkness to the light. That word translated as preferred is also this verb, agape, is they put themselves into darkness more than and rather than light. So it's not inherently and guaranteed to be a good thing, but it's as a good thing, it is a putting yourself on a level with and connecting with another thing. It's stepping outside of yourself into another thing. So the cat theology. To explain the difference between these two things. I have a couple cats. I would definitely say that I love my cats. But in what capacity, right? Like, I call them my cat friends all the time. But we're not really friends. Not in the real sense of what a friend is, right? We're too unlike. A cat and a person we're just too different to really be equally contributing friends, to have, strictly speaking, a friendship. We're not alike enough. I still very much love them, right? And I serve them a lot, right? I feed them, I clean up after them, I pet them, I cuddle them, and they seem to be affectionate toward me as well. We have a great thing going, and there is a great deal of fondness there. But because of our differences in capacity, we're not friends. That's an important distinction, because that's been the relationship between humanity and God. Has been, God is high up here, and I'm not. And so, yeah, he can wash my feet, and it's like taking out my litter box, right? It's doing a thing for me that I need done that he can do that I can't do for myself. And that's great. It is truly great. And he is... But that's not the point of what Jesus is trying to do. The point of what Jesus has been trying to do, as he's told told us before is he wants to be friends with us. But there's a problem. There's been a problem in how do we be friends with Jesus when there's this disparity, this inequality that is in the way. What Jesus has been attempting to do is fix that inequality so that we can come to him not only to be served by him, but as friends. Peter hasn't gotten that up to present. That's why John's been called the disciple whom Jesus loved. It's because John's the one who let Jesus love him. And was willing to more or less go along for the ride. We saw Peter trying to put himself in the place of and to serve Jesus as like this, you're higher up than me and I'm going to try to put myself in your place and serve you. I'm going to draw my sword. Oh, you'll never wash my feet. All of these things are Peter's view of what service of Jesus looked like before. Again, behind John, right? John got that it's just sit back and let Jesus serve me at least. Peter was always trying to put it on his terms and to be doing more for Jesus rather than letting Jesus do more for him. And that's all extremely important in the context of this conversation. So what is asked? First of all, what does Jesus call Peter? He calls him Simon Peter, which is what he called him when he first met him. So again, this is, and what happened there is when Peter was called to be a disciple. So we're, again, repeating the call of Peter as a disciple is how we should see this. Because what that means is different than what it meant. It means a different thing to follow Jesus around as he's an itinerant preacher than it means to follow Jesus post-resurrection. So we're having another call because we have a different kind of discipleship. So, first question, Peter, from Jesus. Peter, do you love me? Love, agape, is the word that's used. Do you serve me? Serve's not quite right, but you get the sense of it, right? Do you serve me? And Peter says, Lord, I'm your friend. And Jesus says, okay, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. We'll come back to the sheep part when we conclude this love exchange. Second time around, Jesus, same question. Peter, do you serve me? Peter responds, Jesus, you're my friend. Jesus, third time. Peter, are you my friend? Now, Peter's distressed. Jesus, how could you even ask me that? Not, I'm upset that you're asking me a third time because I remember that I betrayed you 3 times or denied you 3 times or any of that. But Jesus has changed the question. How, Jesus, could you possibly question whether or not we're friends? Like, of course we are. You know everything, you know that. We're definitely friends. Peter's attitude has changed. He's no longer trying to serve Jesus. He is instead regarding Jesus as a friend. This is the more explicit form of I entered the tomb first. This is, I understand on some level that you have changed humanity. And whereas before we could not be friends and so I was trying to serve you, I now have grasped that through your actions, not mine, we are at a level where now we can be and are friends. And so I'm not the guy who's pulling his sword now, who's refusing to let you wash his feet. I'm now the guy who is, and the first one, who is your friend. And I'm not doing the things I did before, and I'm going to just sit here and reaffirm and reaffirm. No, all this is Jesus, we're friends. And that is why Peter is the head of the church. Is because that is his understanding of relationship with Jesus. And his job is to take that to everyone else. Which is what Peter, or what Jesus tells him, is every time he says we're friends, Jesus says, great, then you take care of everyone else. What are you supposed to provide to them, to feed them with, to tend them with? You're supposed to take to them the thing that will ultimately feed and satisfy them, which is this friendship with me. If you have it, you can take it to other people so that they have it too. And so you get to lead my church because you're the one who, you have now gotten to the point that you understand how it is I want people to relate with me. Peter has had tremendously positive conversion experience as a result of whatever's gone on, and has recognized and understood what Jesus is calling of his followers. Also probably not accidental that it's definitely not accidental that it's placed in the context again of the same general location as where the 6th chapter of John, the Bread of Life discourse, took place. First there was the multiplication of loaves and fishes, and then there was the talk about Jesus feeding everyone, and then there was Peter being the one who stood out above everyone and said, Lord, to whom else shall we go? Geographically, we're basically the same place. So all of that is the backdrop, but most importantly, Peter is accepting the new call to discipleship, which is not one of serving Jesus, but one of being his friend. And that sets the tone for the church, and it sets and in that we're setting up Peter, but we're also, because of when this is likely being written, setting up the idea of what the Pope is. The leader of the church is first and foremost a friend of Jesus. Now then, we're going to finally wrap up this situation between Peter and John. So Peter is Jesus' friend, had this conversation, gotten ahead of John, at least in one sense. We'll see, not in every sense, because just different guys called to different things. But Peter does get the big job. And what comes with the big job is not exactly super fun, which Jesus is extremely upfront about. And then now we see the disciple call, follow me, right? Hey, Peter, cool, here's what's going to happen, follow me. Because, reminder, I went through all of that, but you weren't there to see it. No, Jesus is not saying that as a dig. He's saying that it's a great honor and invitation, right? If you're really my friend, then you get to follow me through doing all these things that I did as well. And I mean, that's what it looks like to lead the Christian church, is to follow in the footsteps of Christ. You don't get to lead other people to be like Christ without being like Christ, which involves doing the things that he did. So you need, part of the deal is following him, which Peter seems entirely fine with, by the way. There's no pushback at all. He's, okay, sure. Whereas before, when he was just trying to serve Jesus, he got to the line of going through that and stopped short. Now, oh yeah, sure, right? Jesus described it earlier. No greater love has someone than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friend. Peter, as the friend of Jesus, can take the step that Peter, as the servant of Jesus, never could. And he's fine with that. Mostly. Then he wants to know, what about him? Now we see the dynamic has shifted. At the supper, with the washing of the feet, who was closest to Jesus? John was right there, right next to Jesus, and Peter was farther away. Now, we've switched that. Now, Jesus and Peter are having this close private conversation, and John's kind of trailing along behind. The proximity has changed, along with the status of the relationship, but John is still there. He's still an important figure and a player. And Peter wants to know, what about him? Okay, I'm fine with what is going to happen to me, I suppose. Sure, let's do that. Him too, right? He's also your guy. So that's everybody, right? And Jesus is really clear. Not your business. But he says it in a way Peter thinks he means, no, he's never going to die. But Jesus is really very clear. This is not your business. It can be whatever I want to happen to him will. Don't worry about it. John had a different experience of the crucifixion of Jesus. He was there. It kind of looks like Jesus was a little preferential toward the people who went through that with him. Mary Magdalene, John is the only one of the apostles who isn't martyred. Jesus seems to have taken care of the people who went through that with him. Like, they paid some of their dues already, which is fair. They certainly had. This is especially interesting because John's writing this. So apparently Peter's takeaway, and as a result of that, much of the early churches seems to have been John was never going to die, or wasn't going to die before Jesus came back. And John writing this says, yeah, but I don't think that's what that means. Like, what he said was, Peter, this isn't any of your business. And Peter took that to mean this, but he was wrong, guys. You shouldn't keep talking about how I'm not going to die, because I don't think that's what this is his last thing when he's writing the gospel that he wants to put to rest. I also forgot to try to stop people from talking about how I'm never going to die, because that's ridiculous. He doesn't think that, but it must have been going around, especially when everybody else had been martyred, and he'd only been exiled and seemed to be more or less comfortable, and the rumor must have started. It must have started clearly from people talking who didn't actually understand what Jesus meant. So he's not really trying to, I don't think, get one in on Peter here, like, I get the last word because it's my gospel. It's more like people are missing the point about this thing. So, I've got a little bit of ink left. I'm going to throw in a correction to that so they stop talking about this because it's silly. And then we've got a similar close. Jesus did a lot more stuff than what we have written down. But, it's so much. Like, I can't tell you all the stuff he did. These are the important things. Focus on this and you'll get the gist of it. And as a general rule, like, I hope, having read this, you, my audience, you people reading and studying this book today, have a better sense of who Jesus was and what he was trying to do than you did before. The ultimate goal of the book, I think, is to lead people to have faith in Jesus and to live accordingly. Last point is that this is the first time in the entirety of the gospel that John puts himself into it in the first person. He's talked about himself, but he's always used this third person, the one that Jesus loved, description to keep from changing the frame of reference to the thing. It's not a first-person narrative. It's not, and then I did, and then this happened to me, and then I did, and he doesn't want us trying to look at it through the eyes of John as we're looking at it. But then as he's ending, he does bring it back around and say, as he's done one other time, seriously, I know these things are true, though, because I'm a guy who was there. That guy I've been talking about, that was me, by the way. This is written by an eyewitness. So yeah, there are a lot more things written. There are a lot more things that Jesus did, but these are the key ones. The goal here is that you all come to believe and to act accordingly. And I told you the things that I think you need to know to do that, and tried not to weigh you down with extraneous details. So hopefully everyone who engages meaningfully in the study of the Gospel according to John can have some experience of the deepening of their faith and renewal of their commitment to that life. This has been an overview of the conclusion of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Gospel According to John, an encounter with grace and truth. For more information, consult our written study, and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.